Welcome to the Atheist and Christian Book Club, a monthly gathering of skeptics and believers respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. And I wanted to thank a couple of people. Conrad basically paid for the meal for everyone this evening. Appreciate that, Conrad.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Our chef for tonight was Daniel Ray.
Yeah.
Meatloaf and potatoes. My wife Jimmy provided most of the dessert.
Yeah.
And we had other contributors to that. Tilden, where's Tilden?
Tilden?
Okay, yeah.
He left.
Tilden?
We had, I think, several. If you brought something else, if you raise your hand, or we want to say thank you for that. We got an exciting couple of announcements to make before we get in. Of course, we're going to be looking at the book "God Is Not Great" by the late Christopher Hitchens in just a moment. But before we do, I want to take just a few minutes to talk to you about what's coming up next. This is not the normal first Friday of the month. We had to go a day early. Daniel Ray and I are going to have to be driving in the morning up to Oklahoma to Shawnee for an apologetics conference at Oklahoma Baptist University. We've got a couple of churches we're speaking at up there. My name is James Walker. I'm president of Watchman Fellowship, and it's an apologetics Christian ministry focusing on mostly interfaith evangelism, but we deal with other areas as well of apologetics, defending the Christian faith. Of course, I am Christian. The other co-founder with me is Bill Cluck. He's the other co-founder of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. Bill is a former Christian, now atheist. And we do a little things before I get the announcements, just kind of see who all is here. How many is this your first time here? First book club at?
Oh,
1,
great.
2, 3, 4. 4 brand new people. You should win a prize.
Cool, you brought your dad.
You're not, but it would be nice if you were able to win a prize.
He doesn't seem real hardcore, you know. Seems, yeah.
Now we also have a couple of things. How many of us? This is atheist and Christian, but we also have others as well. So self-identify if you don't mind. How many of you are here that are Christian? Identify as Christian? Raise your hand. What is this? All on the my right. So we have the right. Is it? Are we zoned in here? You're in the atheist zone or the Christian zone? Segregated, yes. Now, part of this is we're supposed to be friends with each other. That means it's okay to be sitting next to somebody who you don't agree with. Okay. But I think we might be outnumbered as Christians tonight. Again, this is the second time that's happened recently. How many of you self-identify as atheist? We are definitely outnumbered. Okay. That's okay. That's a good thing. And how many would be other? Maybe neither? Agnostic, okay. Well, we'll put agnostic in the atheist category as well for this. But we do have some people sometimes that are here that would self-identify in other ways, and I don't want to leave them out. So
There's humanism.
Humanism, okay, yeah. Secular, yeah. Now, is that a
It's a mix of everything.
is that a denomination of atheism?
Something really important.
How many people here are left-handed?
Left-handed.
No.
A couple.
We better leave.
So atheism is a denomination of secularism.
Oh, there you go.
So it's the other way around.
That's the way of saying it.
Yeah.
Well, we are not going first Friday for a while, but only because we can do some special things, so the dates are going to be a little bit different, so you may want to make note of that. First of all, as a reminder, we announced this last month, but our next book club is going to be Frank Turek live. Is going to be with us at the book club. We're going to be looking at another book, his book he's co-author of, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Frank actually specifically asked me if he could come back out here. He had such a good time last time he was here, and he wants to see you guys again and pick up where he left off. And so this is going to be a different date. So the April book club is going to be one Friday early. It's going to be the last Friday of this month of March 27th. We'll still have the meal at 6, and then the club will start at 7. And we're really excited about that. So we're also going to go out of order a little bit. Let me get this passed around. Bill, if you could take those and pass them. Here's our flyers to help us get the word out. So now we are also going out of date to be able to, in order as well, to be able to get another, maybe one of our most popular guest that appeared live with us. How many of you remember Tim McGrew? Remember Tim McGrew? Okay, Tim is coming back. In fact, he also asked me, contacted me, when can I do the Atheist and Christian Book Club again? And so I said, let me know when you're going to be in town. Well, he's going to be in town the week of April 17th. That's a Friday. So he's going to be joining us. And our book for that particular book club is the book, The Four Views on Christianity and Philosophy. It's a four-view book that's written by, edited by Paul Gould, who is also co-editor with Daniel Ray on the book The Story of the Cosmos. So this book has basically four different ways of looking at how philosophy and Christianity come together or don't come together, you know. And so Tim McGrew, we're going to do his chapter first. He wrote the chapter on the convergent model. He believes that philosophy confirms Christianity. So he's not anti-philosophy. He's a philosophy professor. In fact, for those that don't know him yet, Tim McGrew is professor of philosophy at Western Michigan University. He's a contributor to this book and several others as well. So Tim argues that philosophy basically supports and confirms Christianity. Then the following month, we're going to do another chapter, another section of the book by Graham Oppy on his position as an atheist is that philosophy trumps Christianity. So that'll be his position. And Tim McGrew specifically asked for that because he thinks that Graham, he said, has one of the most compelling cases. He said, obviously I have a different position, but he says he makes the most compelling case, he thinks, for that. So anyway, we're going to be interacting. Now Dr. Oppy lives in Australia, so we probably aren't going to be flying him in, but we will hope to get him on Skype or somehow kind of way to bring him on to answer our questions as well. So that's the next 2 months, and so I'm really excited about that. But tonight's topic is going to be the God is Not Great book. I was at last night briefly at the Metroplex Atheist and just saying hey to some people and reminding them about the book club. And I just asked, how many of you have ever read the book God is Not Great? 90% of the hands went up right away. This is a very, very influential book. And so we've kind of stalled dealing with this. The reason that I thought now was the time to deal with it is some of you may have watched the debate between Frank Turek and Christopher Hitchens. Since we're having Frank next month here in person, I thought it might kind of tie the two together with the debate. How many of you got to read or have already in the past read God is Not Great? How many of you got to read the two focus chapters that we're looking at? And did any of you get to watch the debate with Frank Turek and? Huh? A debate. So, okay. I'm very, very excited about this, and I'm going to kind of turn it over to my co-founder, Bill, to maybe kind of start the meeting.
So, Courtney. Why is God not great?
Why are we asking me first? What?
You're the Metroplex former president.
You're the founder.
Come on.
This is why you put me up front.
Bill is good at this, at putting people on the spot.
Well, I mean, so let's see. The two chapters that we're focusing on, 5 and 10.
15.
15.
Well, whatever. So,
I think it was medical, right?
Metaphysical.
Well, I kind of did the audiobook for like the whole thing through, so I didn't really focus on
Yeah, the whole book's up for grabs.
the
We
two
don't have to
chapters as
focus.
much. So I'm not quite sure what was specifically.
But what impacted you the most on why
God wouldn't be
great?
Well, I mean, we've had a lot of different debates about different topics, and the whole problem of evil is a
Sure.
big debate topic. I do think that he brings up some amazing points about just logically why the world that we see doesn't make sense to have had a designer behind it or to have a benevolent God behind it. With his chapter on kind of the fate of most creatures that have been alive through the history of the earth and the universe, that there's kind of a pattern of
Extinction, mass extinction.
yeah,
You know, like the
and
Permian
I mean, pain and suffering, and so there's an evil quality to that, but there's also just lack of intelligence in the design of,
Right.
of certain animals and things throughout the history, and you can see this progression from simplistic to more complex,
Right.
and it makes more sense that it's a natural process that doesn't need a higher power to guide it.
Well, like bacteria hung around for 1 billion years, I think from 3.5 billion to 2.5 billion. And it's like God's going,
Yeah.
what bacteria? I just can't get through that.
Oh, Cambrian explosion, where you have all these.
Life, cool
Yeah,
life
and,
forms coming
and you know, from what he points out and from what I've learned, science just kind of points to these natural processes that work with or without a intelligent, you know.
Yeah, but how about the Cambrian explosion 560 million years ago, where every major phyla just suddenly appears and there's no real pre-Cambrian fossils? What would you say to that? No, the Cambrian, where 500.
No,
I don't know.
but
I'm
there's,
not-
Okay, wait a minute, wait a
there's
minute.
no evidence that there was no fossils. Keep in mind, we've had 5 extinctions.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't say there's fossils before that.
Oh yeah,
It's-
unless it's tough
see,
to get
and
fossils.
Plus,
True.
the evolutionary process might have took 100 million years to get to the Cambrian period.
I think that flies in the face of the actual evidence. I mean, if we trust the paleontology that we have today, we've looked at all these strata all over the world, and what we find before that explosion is absolutely nothing that would say there was any kind of progression to create all these phyla. I mean, so if you believe your science, you should say, well, god dang, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's like God has something for trilobites. He
Hold on
loves
for a second. I was just
trilobites.
going to say, so they just found that the oldest living creature, the oldest living thing that ever existed on the planet was almost 4 billion years ago.
So anyway, wait a minute.
And it was a bacteria. But
So Dad, where did she go wrong? I mean, why is
Well,
God
I don't know
right?
why we started with me, but
That's where it went wrong.
This is
That's
Courtney's
my-
dad.
Yeah,
my style.
I love the title. I was drawn to it. God is not great. I thought to myself, God is not great until you get to know Him. Oh, man, everything changes.
Oh boy.
Courtney, we love your dad.
I know. So this is my dad. He's religious, and I grew up being religious with him, and I
qualified then.
well,
Yeah.
believer.
So what evidence
Okay.
do you have that God is great?
I met him. I talked to him. He's my friend. He's my life. Paul said, Christ is my life, and I have experienced Christ.
And he's hardcore.
Yeah, I know. I told him.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
They say one of the Hitchens arguments which you brought up is that there's this incredible extinction, 98%, 99% of species are. So if you put this in a logical argument, there's a lot of species that died, therefore God couldn't have done it.
No.
That's really kind of what the whole
No.
thing boils down
Well,
to.
it's actually just a counter to the argument that everything we see seems to be by a perfect design of intention. And a lot of what he's saying is that most of what we see from an evolutionary standpoint, because we seem to see design in our lifetime, and it seems design, but if you go back geologically through time, you see a much more kind of devastating record of chaos and of things not being designed ideally, things not making sense as design, like being counterproductive or taking up too much energy in the organism and things like that. So he talks about there being not only a lot of suffering that comes from a huge mass of human-like creatures that died because of the state of their teeth versus being perfectly designed to thrive and flourish and live meaningful lives. We see that today, but we don't see that today on the whole. We see a lot of people suffering and having, birth defects and mental illness, and there's all kinds of issues that we see. We are not perfectly designed, and it doesn't make sense that there should be a reason to find. And I talk about this too with things like child cancer and child abuse and things like that. With Christianity, there's an effort to create or find the meaning in that, find the purpose. Why would a benevolent God have that happen, have that be part of His plan? And with
Is that
atheism,
just another version of the problem of evil then?
well, I think that it's just the atheist response is there is no purpose, there is no reason, and that does have some solace to it, that we don't have to try and use up all of our time trying to find a purpose, we just try to fix it.
And I think, and I'm not saying that Christians don't try to fix it either, but I think that it does create an existential crisis of what is the meaning, what is the purpose, how is this possibly the best possible world that we could have been given.
I think we're saying that it's not the best possible world anymore.
I don't know, but that's
Anymore.
that's
I got a
the
question for you though.
atheist thing.
To be able to say that it was a poor design, wouldn't we have to know the intent of the designer? Because, I mean, I can take my cell phone, I could say, this is poorly designed. The battery only lasts 12 hours.
Yeah.
Well, they could have designed it where it lasted for 2 weeks, but it would lose its portability. It would have to have like a car battery.
Well,
going with
it's kind of like the speaker of the phone was up here, and Christians are saying, "Oh, it's perfectly designed." It's like, well, it took millions and millions of years for it to evolve to get back here, but it was perfectly designed the whole time. No, that doesn't make any sense.
I never heard anybody say perfectly until this conversation
Yeah.
here.
Well, meaning that if God is perfect and He's the designer, then it is his
And
perfect.
you have
will.
things like evolutionary dead ends where you have Neanderthals, which bury their dead, are a lot like modern Homo sapiens, come into the scene 200,000 years ago and just hang around for 30,000 years ago, and then lose the evolutionary arms race with us Homo sapiens. And it's like, what is the point? These dead end evolution. I mean, do you have an answer for that?
Can I jump in?
Or does anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
In back. You have to talk real loud so we can get you.
Yeah. So, my name's Grant. I didn't catch your name.
I'm Courtney.
Courtney.
Yeah.
So, responding to what you just mentioned, the idea of God is perfect, and then you asserted from there the things that He designed would therefore be perfectly designed. I don't think it follows. So,
Well,
for instance, I'm male.
Yeah.
My wife and I had a baby. She is female.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just the characteristics I have do not immediately pass on to the things I create on the basis that I have those characteristics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
Just
well,
because
it's,
God is perfect.
I
Does that
well,
mean
and,
His
and again,
creation is perfect? 'Cause
yeah.
then, at that point, interestingly enough, it would be God creating God, right? He did not.
well, creating and whether the thing is perfect is separate from whether it's a logical design is really what I'm getting at. And I don't mean to create a straw man for Christianity or what Christians believe. It's just when we talk about what the atheist response to that is, sometimes that is the argument, and this is a response to that argument. Doesn't mean that everybody agrees with that argument. And so I'm not saying that would be the argument that you guys would make, but it's just that, for the purpose of context, that's what he's saying, is that when we look at the world, it doesn't seem intelligently designed.
Go ahead.
The way that people argue that it is.
What if we approach it from the perspective of the Quran? Okay, God created Satan and all the angels. Satan was just one among them. So He creates this being that is so close to Him, so much like the perfect one, the perfect God, that He cannot worship Adam. He cannot serve Adam. He cannot serve man. He forbids it. And because He refuses to serve man, He is cast from heaven. God, Allah, says you are lower than man. You are lower than God. You are not God. You are not perfect.
So what is the point?
So the point is that He was an aspect of perfection, an aspect of God.
Yeah, right. Well, God's right hand guy. Yeah.
And you're looking for perfection, and He's right there.
Right.
And He's right there walking among us. But the human beings, they don't recognize their own perfection, and so they don't understand that that basically that Satan is just like God.
So Neil had a response. What do you say, Neil?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to some good old Aquinas here. We run into trouble if we're talking about an omniscient, perfect, superior being when we try to import our limited, finite ideas and thinking and world up to that level. So what he said is there's only really two ways to address that. We have to either use analogy, where we say, well, we think he's like this because of such, and it's an analogy. We're not saying it's an absolute, that's an inference. And the other thing that he said is we can talk about what he is not, because once we establish that he is, or if we go to scripture and establish that, then we can say, well, he's not, these kind of things. So I think with that as a foundation, what we kind of have to do then is take that and then look at the science that's out there and try to see, how these things can bridge each other, and other than just spending time talking about, well, I think God was, really a good guy. He was really a bad guy. No, he was no guy at all. Well, he was actus purus. He was full perfection. So we need to address it from our view to try and not get into his head, so to speak. Okay?
But let's do this. We've got a quote from the book that maybe we'll give some things to talk about a little bit. I'm going to ask Daniel if he'll read this for us. This is from page 64.
Talking about St. Augustine, Christopher Hitchens says, Augustine was a self-centered fantasist and an earth-centered ignoramus. He was guiltily convinced that God cared about his trivial theft from some unimportant pear trees, and quite persuaded by an analogous solipsism that the sun revolved around the earth. The reason I picked these quotes for conversation, because I think it shows an aspect of Christopher Hitchens' writing that I found permeates the book. Later on he says something, I won't get ahead, but the way he takes down Augustine in a very ad hominem kind of style, and lumps him in with calling him an ignoramus because he believed in geocentrism, which that was the dominant view for 1800 years since Aristotle. Mm-hmm. So it was the science. It wasn't just a theologian who had this crazy idea. But I just thought that this was kind of Christopher's style, that he's an eloquent writer, but then at the heart of this, there's no footnote, there's no reference, there's no quote from Augustine. He just blasts Augustine in this sense, and I kind of got that perspective that this is kind of his approach to everything.
So is he overreaching?
He is overreaching. To tie back into last week. So that's kind of, I don't know what you all think, but that's one thing that I've read this. I had to read this for my master's degree, and I found that he was saying a lot of things, and he could say it quite, eloquently. But in the end, it's an ad hominem dressed up in a tuxedo.
Well, the main point of his book is, the title is God is not good, but he doesn't, God's not great, I'm sorry, but he doesn't really make that case. What the case he makes is that people have always been evil, and sometimes they do it in the name of religion, sometimes in the name of politics, sometimes in the name of race, ideology, whatever. So I don't really think he ever proves his main point that's the title of his book.
Well, I mean,
well, how do you disprove?
I think that what I'm driving at is
it's not my job to disprove it. He said I'm going to write a book called God is Not Great. I don't think he made that
Finish
case.
the title, though. Finish the title.
Yeah.
God is not great.
And then
Finish the title.
And then second.
How religion poisons everything.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, but I don't think that he makes that case either. I think he makes the case.
This is how
people
he does
people
make
are
that
brutal and evil, and they do bad things in the name of
well, no,
a lot of things.
I don't think that's true, though. I think he does talk about people having negative motivations, but he also talks about the world around us negatively affecting us as well. And he talks about circumstance and an unfairness in health and in evolution and in all of these things. So he does talk about not only what humans choose to do, but what the world does to us and what circumstance does to us. And so I think that he's showing that if someone is arguing God is great, they may be arguing from a point of privilege, that they have not experienced the level of suffering and insanity from human history and animal history. And so that's the God that someone is arguing for isn't so great if this is the world that.
So do you think one of his strongest points?
One of his strongest points is, this is one of his great quotes. God waits around with indifference for 100,000 years, because Homo sapiens have been around about 150,000. And for 98,000 years, he's just
going, how do I save these people? How do I give them, the great, enlightenment or whatever? And then 2,000 years ago, Jesus comes. And if you're a Muslim and you believe that's the final deal, 600 years ago. And if you're a Mormon, it's 150. I mean, why wait so long to give us the supreme revelation?
Fallacies in everything you guys are saying, in my opinion. Number one, you're assuming that God can do anything and that he wants to, and I don't know that we necessarily believe that God can do anything.
But is that asking too much to go and get the big revelation sooner?
The second point, just to finish it off, is just because we don't know why he did something that doesn't seem logical to us doesn't mean there was no...
Well, we do know that the ones he revealed himself to, the Jews, of all the places in the Sinai Peninsula, they picked the one with no oil.
Let me see
what type of divine revelation is that?
Let me see about this. Okay.
And that's what Christopher Hitchens is.
Let's try to get a focus here on this. Just back to our quote, just to kind of close this out.
But they have lots of natural gas by the way.
Oh, well, good for them.
Can we all agree on this? Can we all agree that it was highly unfair for Hitchens to accuse Augustine of being a earth-centered ignoramus when virtually every scientist, every atheist held the same view? But it's Augustine was
Why did God reveal that
to Augustine? So we wouldn't.
Well, why aren't the scientists of the day ignoramuses also?
I do think that that's a good point, though. That again, and to your point of creating a straw man of Christianity, and I do not want to do that. But he has debated a lot of apologists and a lot of Christians, or he had. And so he is starting from a standpoint of this is what people are saying, what some people are saying. And so what he's responding to is their version of Christianity, and it does not encompass everyone's Christianity.
Well, that's fair. I'm a one-off Christian, so that's a fair point.
Yeah. So and I was raised as one too. I was raised as one outside of the norm as well. So this type of rhetoric, I don't like it either. I'm much nicer than Christopher Hitchens, but there is something to be said for, again, there is a huge claim in different religious populations that we have the truth. We have revelation from God. We know more than you do about truth. And they hold the truth above everyone else and say, and like the Christian, the Catholic Church holds the truth of that. And they held the Bible from the language of the people. On pain of death, you couldn't own that Bible. So they kept the truth secret and disseminated the truth according to what they thought. And so what he's saying is, if you can make a claim that you hold a truth that I am not privy to, then I hold a truth that you were not privy to in your own time. So if the Bible is going to be relevant, it's going to be helpful, it needs to have information that rises above the time it was written in. And it doesn't. And so that's the point.
So what were you going to say? Point.
Yeah, fair enough. Getting back to the main point of the book here, he says how religion poisons everything. He only gives half the story. He doesn't deal with all the good stuff that religion's done.
Well, let's just do a survey on that. Yeah. How many of no Christians voting, please? How many of the atheist agnostics would say that good things sometimes come out of religion also?
Okay. So that's the main point of his book. And Frank Turek, in one of the debates, at the end says, I think we can summarize the book in two ways. One is, there is no God and I hate him. The other is, Christians do bad things, therefore God does not exist. And of course, that's non sequitur.
Well,
that's really kind of the whole thing.
Well, wait a minute, let's get Terry.
The implication. He never states it quite so baldly.
No.
I think you also, the question you ask, are how many would believe that good come out of it, but ask the percentage. How, a little bit.
It's hard to quantify, probably, but if you had to, how would you quantify?
I would say that a little.
Well, Terry, you've
1%.
Would you say you've had a religion poisoned your? Was a bad experience?
Yeah, I
in
had
your
a
life?
bad experience. I didn't.
Why is that? What was so bad about it?
Were you bitten by a Christian?
I was held down and had hands laid on me to get the devil out of me.
Woo.
So, and that was at a
It didn't work.
Didn't work.
I mean, you say it in a funny way, but that is could be very traumatic, and I don't want to make light of it.
Catholic Church in the 70s.
But that doesn't mean that your opinion of religion is based in your own experience.
So in the United States, there's about 2,600 hospitals, which is almost half of all the hospitals in the United States are faith-based hospitals. So clearly some good is getting done here, right?
No, where you
Yeah, Chris had something for us, I think.
I think the Augustine quote, the Augustine quote in context, I think I can explain that. So the title of his chapter 5 is "The Metaphysical Claims of Religion Are False."
No.
And I think what he's doing here is taking Augustine,
one of the greatest, arguably the greatest Latin Christian thinker. He's taking him as one of several whipping boys, if you will. And I think what he's doing is he's making an argument from the lesser to the greater. He's saying if they are ignorant about the nature of the physical universe, of even the solar system itself, then their views of the metacosmos, that outside of the universe, would be false.
Right.
And that's what that's one of his 4 main arguments in chapter 5, at least I counted 4. He spends the most of the time on that. Augustine's part of that argument.
So what's his other arguments in chapter 5?
I would say his third argument, if you can identify a first cause of the universe, sure, you can call that God, but you can't know what the nature of that first cause is. In other words, a lot of philosophers will rephrase that saying, well, you've made it to the God of the philosophers, but you haven't made it to the God of the Bible or the God of the Quran.
Could be a deistic God. Or
right, yeah, why even call it
Allah.
God? So that's what I take to be his third argument. And his fourth argument, which actually does touch metaphysics, is you can argue that there's a first cause to all the caused things in the universe, but then you run into the problem of infinite regressive causes.
Yes.
How
What
can
caused the first cause?
Yeah, exactly. So that's his fourth
Who created
argument.
God, yeah.
Who designed the designer? Who caused the first
And
cause?
the next thing is from physics down. One
Go
second.
ahead.
Everything starts simplistic and becomes more complex. This starts with the Big Bang. This goes into evolution. This goes into every star system. It goes into everything that we are. Starts simple, becomes complex. How could there be an all-perfect being before there was anything?
That's an assumption.
That's a
We've
fact.
covered
That's
that
an
here.
assumption.
That's a scientific fact.
No, it isn't.
No, go
The
ahead.
Big
No, I
Bang.
didn't interrupt you.
The
No,
Big
sorry.
Bang is a
Go ahead.
theory, my
Go ahead.
friend.
Go ahead.
The Big Bang is a theory. We have no evidence of it.
A theory.
What?
It's a theory.
How about the Bell Laboratories when they found the background radiation on the Big Bang?
No.
Okay,
Continue. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
God, Neil.
I said
Where'd
there's
you
4
go off the
arguments
rails?
that I detect in his writings. The second argument is kind of nebulous. It's kind of he quotes William of Ockham, and then he also quotes Tertullian and Kierkegaard.
What does he say about him?
Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
All 3 together to say, look, these representatives of Christianity or religion sort of invalidate faith because they tend to be sort of against reason. They tend to be more fideistic, saying, you can only prove something by faith, not by reason. So it's a kind of a strange argument that I don't have a lot of appreciation for. Kierkegaard, but
anyways, go
definitely
ahead.
fits.
Yeah.
So let me defend Augustine here a little bit. First of all, it's disingenuous for the man, aside from the vicious ad hominem attack, to take this guy's writings, which I don't know if you ever read City of God. I haven't. It's voluminous. And try to import it into a scientific discussion, because the City of God that he wrote was actually against the City of Rome, and what he was talking about was the nature of man and how he behaves without faith and without Christ. So again, it was an argument of behavior and of metaphysical understanding, not of science. So that was a disingenuous move on his part. And then to go back to Augustine, one of the famous sayings of his is credo ad intelligas, which means I believe, therefore I understand. Okay, and again, anything that Hitchens has written, or whatever we talk about here in our discussions, is only predicated on something that we have assumed as a truth that we understand, which goes back to your issue about the Big Bang, which is big hocus pocus, by the way. So again, so I don't see Hitchens. I don't see Hitchens bringing anything to bear that is a sound metaphysical agreement or argument.
Okay, he had a response.
Why do we always have to have a battle of wills? A battle of wills, deciding who is authoritative. Why can't we just accept people's statements at face value, no matter who they are or where they're from. It doesn't matter if they're a philosopher or a scientist. Let's just take their statements at face value, and if they're actionable or practical in our lives, use them. If they're not, don't. Don't criticize everybody and make a big fuss.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're criticizing Hitchens.
Yes, I am.
So, and I just kind of want to clarify that there was a mention of scientific theories and what that means, and I'm sure most of us in the room, for something to make it to the level of a scientific theory, there has to be an overwhelming level of evidence to back it up, and for it to remain a theory, it has to be non-contradicted. So there has to be continued evidence coming in that continues to no contradictory evidence. So meaning that because it is a theory, that is a very highly established concept in science. If it's a hypothesis, it's just an idea. If it's a theory, then it has a lot of weight behind it. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Listen, you're denying the paradigm. So first of all, there's been huge paradigm shifts in science. Einstein's special theory of relativity, and was a total shift from what the dominating Newtonian thinking was.
Right.
So that you wouldn't say that disproved Newton. It just added a new dimension that wasn't there before.
It encompassed more of Newton.
Yes.
Newton was so valid within a bound, but
Yes.
Einstein encompassed more situation.
Only on the macro sense. There's still micro issues. But let me go to my other point. So for example, for years there was the idea that there was no planet beyond Neptune, or maybe Uranus, because of the gravitational studies that Newton had done at the time. That was the accepted theory.
1600.
And then we found that there was Uranus out there, okay?
Right.
That didn't disprove what Newton had done. It just showed that we hadn't thought about it and made those further calculations. So the thing about science, again, is that it's not an absolute thing.
Right.
You're trying to establish universal propositions from finite studies. So you're subject to interpolation and extrapolation issues. And when we say that the world is 1,500 billion years old, all this, that there's evidence that that's hogwash.
It's called a map satellite. It's called
let me just kind of wrap this section up a little bit. Well, okay, what I'm hearing is that every scientific model, there is a shelf life involved, and it's not that it doesn't mean that science is bad. It just means that as more research is done, the paradigm sometimes does shift.
And it's self-correcting.
I only watched a small part of the debate between Turek and Hitchens, and it started out, Turek spends, 5 of his precious 20 minutes in his opening statement trying to defend the Big Bang to Hitchens, who no doubt buys into the Big Bang. Why are you spending 5 minutes supporting the Big Bang? And now we're here, and a Christian is shooting that down. So I don't know, the Christians can't agree among themselves on that. So.
But you also have scientists not agreeing among themselves, too.
Right, but
There are people that
well-established.
We have to have someone that actually knows this stuff. Go ahead.
Not to throw a wrench in the works of the Big Bang.
But he does want to.
I think it's fruitful for conversation as we're having right now. My friend Wayne and I, we do a podcast. Some of you might know. A year ago, we did a podcast on things. The title of the podcast was "Things Too Big for the Big Bang," and it doesn't destroy the Big Bang, but what it does call into question very seriously is Einstein's concept of homogeneity and isotropy in the universe. So in other words, Einstein, in order to crunch his numbers, he assumed the universe was the same in all directions and everywhere you look. And it makes it very easy to do math. But what we've discovered since our observational technologies have improved are these megastructures of quasars and galaxies in younger parts of the universe that absolutely should not be there because there wasn't enough time for them to develop. Now, it doesn't shoot Big Bang in the foot. It just goes, how in the world did these things get there? So it's kind of like the Cambrian explosion of the cosmos. We have these fossils way back in the very early universe, structures of galaxies, filaments of quasars, the brightest things in the universe. that are just sitting there, strings of light years, that there's just no concept of time for them to have developed along the continuum of the chronology of the Big Bang. There's 13.8 billion years is not enough time for those things to have developed slowly and gradually.
So you're saying you like the redshift, you believe in the redshift, which Hubble discovered, which was one of the big evidences of the Big Bang, because if you have the redshift, it looks like it's expanding, you can wind it up. So do you basically believe in it, but there's problems within it?
Oh, I mean, there's nothing in cosmology that is absolutely 100%. I mean, to Courtney's point, a theory doesn't mean that it's wrong, or it doesn't mean that it's on shaky ground. But no theory is complete. That doesn't mean it's bad, or it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that as our observational technologies improve, we are finding things that seem contrary to the kind of paradigm that we have right now. So we may be able to keep Big Bang, or maybe not, but it's speaking to the idea of the evolution of paradigms in science.
And Christians have latched onto it because it implies the beginning, which
Can I
implies
say one thing? Dawkins says, don't use God as the gap, the science of the gap. We need better science. You're absolutely correct. There are anomalies. We found some subatomic aspects to hydrogen to justify the difference between matter and antimatter, and why there's a universe at all. Just happening. We are getting better science. Science is the gap. Religion is the enemy of reason.
But here's the thing, you have a place just up the road here, Institute for Creation and Research. And I guarantee you go into that place and they're going to tell you the universe is 6,000 years old. This is just anti-progress, anti-science. And they know science. They can give you science all over the place. They know radiometric, they know that. But they...
let me see that.
They use good science, but they spin it their way.
Let's do this. Let's try to stick to the book. So I will say this. I think we can all agree on this. I'll try to find something that we can all agree on. Just because we say the theory of gravity, we're not questioning the existence of gravity. So I think a lot of that we don't want to make it sound like because we don't know all the answers that we're saying that there's
nothing we can
proven wrong or something.
Here's the thing.
But let's go to another quote if we can, because we're kind of getting away from the book quite a bit. So we got another quote. If I can get Daniel to read for us. This is from page 70.
This is Hitchens talking about how science predicts the future
of the universe in our solar system, etc. He says, we also know something about the future of our solar system. We can now do this while dropping, or even if you insist, retaining the idea of a God. The theory works without the assumption of God. You can believe in a divine mover if you choose, a reference to Aquinas, but it makes no difference at all. And so a couple of things that I thought about in this quote as I chose it. Number one, this kind of goes back to Laplace and Napoleon's conversation, where Napoleon is alleged to have asked the mathematician Pierre-Simon Laplace, where's God in all of your number crunching? And Laplace is said to have said, I have no need of that hypothesis. So this kind of revisits that idea.
It works without that hypothesis.
It seems to be. But the other, the metaphysical aspect of it is that when you bring up the idea of God of the gaps, people that are, my argument about the big structures in the universe was not God of the gaps. But even if we found a mechanism, the Christian theologian would say, well, that's still, God. We're not. But if you say that God is being closed out of these discoveries, then you're assuming what God is like, because you're closing a door kind of on a straw man caricature of what you think God is, because you think that the mechanisms are overruling the nature of who God is. But the second thing in this one is his last statement there, that it makes no difference at all. And I think everybody in the room would probably agree that whether you believe or not believe in God, it does make a difference.
I think what he's saying is that it makes no difference to the theory.
One thing Hitchens the theory itself, because then you have the idea of mathematics and the prediction and the intelligibility. The difference is the metaphysical grounding of where all of that intelligibility and the numbers and all of that comes from. Well, it does make a difference in how you do science.
Yeah, but that's separate from whether it works or not on its own.
That's metaphysical to think it is separate.
Well, I think that's how
it could be separate.
It could be, but that's the metaphysical assumption.
But I think the assumption is saying that it's not separate. So starting from what we know and adding God into it is an assumption. But starting from what we see and what we know and saying this is the world that we started with and this is what we see and observe, and I think it was said before that if you took all the religious texts and they somehow tragically got out of existence, and then kind of started civilization over, the discoveries we've made would stay the same, but the religions would be drastically different.
Go
and
ahead.
so there's not a basis, like, you don't get, if you live without a religious text, you don't get a belief in
we
a
got it.
specific God, right?
Can your friend talk?
Well, but
Go ahead.
that assumes there
Hey,
is
let
no
him-
God of
But the
Revelation.
assumption,
Nobody's going to
I think the assumption there is
Not just you.
the objection to the assumption that God is an assumption about God.
Well, I'm a Christian. I agree with that
circular
quote.
thinking.
So
Where I struggle in the string of methodology, because I kind of wrote this down as I was going through. So, for my understanding, it's that God is metaphysical, and yet there are things within the physical realm that are affected by Him. So, if every effect which God causes comes through to us through the mediation of a secondary cause that He can produce Himself, I don't understand the reasoning for that, and also I can't understand whether God is or is not acting at any point.
Right.
It's indistinguishable to me,
Can I make
and
a-
so I don't have a frame of reference. If I was raised as a Christian, I was not. If I was raised and I was taught that I am living within a framework, then I can understand that being my frame of reference.
Jason, that's a good question, and I think we might be addressing this later this summer. We're going to have the 2 back-to-back books at some point. We don't have it exactly nailed down. We want to maybe bring John Loftus in again, but he's written the book, The Case Against Miracles, which is a kind of a counter to Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Miracles. And we're thinking about doing both of those books and talking about, is there evidence? Are miracles even possible? And if they are possible, is there a way to quantify that? Does God ever act from the outside in a way that we could distinguish as not a natural
Because that's
That's a
where
good
I
question.
struggle. That's
I
my
agree.
one of my biggest struggles in trying to understand the other side.
Shooting from the hip here, just a suggestion. Maybe God wants us to be able to sort of reverse engineer his work or understand cause and effect, so we can have things like science.
But that's also an assumption
Well,
that there is.
I'm just positing this as a
supernatural
potential.
being.
You asked, why does God so often work through secondary causes that we can understand? I'm saying maybe it's because He wants us to understand.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
It's
like
a
this
hypothesis.
proves God or
Yeah,
anything
and
like that.
I struggle working backwards because I feel that the science, as we learn more, as we gain a greater knowledge of the physical universe, that it doesn't get us any closer to where the metaphysical starts to.
But that's exactly what
interact.
science does. It works from the effect back to the cause.
Right.
I mean, you just described what science is all about. I mean, it's
Right, and
we're
it
looking
doesn't
at the
and it
effect
doesn't
and trying
show
to
me.
figure out the cause.
Yeah,
Doesn't
and
show
I don't
God.
see it, and I don't see
Right.
a
I
purpose.
think Ken
a
had
purpose
something.
as
Go
a
ahead,
cause.
Ken. Helps out.
So I think this speaks to a larger concept of that goes back to what Courtney was saying about, well, we wouldn't expect to see this such and such a situation if God existed, or if God didn't exist, we would expect to see certain ways. I don't think you can say anything about God in advance. You can't say He would do something one way or another.
Mhm.
We just basically have to put it down to 50-50. 50 He created percent chance He created a perfect creation, 50% chance He created an imperfect creation. We don't know because we can't say anything ahead of time about God. But if you accept the possibility that there is no God, there are certain things that are necessarily entailed. One is that when you look out and see the way things operate, everything has to be working through secondary causes. If we saw direct things happening from God, then we would know there was a God, right? So things seem to be line up in such a way to suggest that there really isn't anything behind it all. In other words, we would expect that things would be imperfect in creation, that there would be, that we would have pancreatic,
Cancer.
all kinds of different things that would just, things fall apart, right? Because there's really no ultimate design behind it. That's the way things have to be in an imperfect, in a naturalistic
Without
way.
a supernatural
So you
force
line up
controlling
all
it.
these things, and before Laplace, people did really think that God was always intervening in the natural order of things. And then Laplace finds out, oh, and lo and behold, things behave according to natural laws. They're just impersonal. But Christians come back after that and say, oh, well, we can accommodate that. But what they're doing is they're just accommodating it after the fact. That's not something they would have predicted. That's something that naturalism predicts. That's, I think, a strong distinction.
Can you just said so? Because things fall apart, they couldn't be designed.
No.
That's what you just said.
No. That's the opposite. That's the exact opposite. If you got that message, you totally misunderstood my point. With God, there's a 50-50% chance that things would be perfect or imperfect. Under naturalism, there's a 100% chance that things would be imperfect. It's a prediction of naturalism. So. So it's not saying that God couldn't have done it. It's just saying that it's a much more natural prediction.
What is the
one of the things that both these guys have brought up the Laplace quote here, and I think this is getting back to Hitchens' book there. I did checking out of a few things, which I'll hopefully get a chance to bring up. But one thing is Hitchens ignored the rest of the story, as you might say, because Laplace told Napoleon, I have no need of that hypothesis. He was a good mathematician. He was a kind of a mechanistic one. The most brilliant French mathematician at the time was Lagrange. He was one of the top 2 or 3 mathematicians of the century. And Napoleon was talking to him later, and Lagrange says, oh, but it's such a beautiful hypothesis. It explains so many things. And which is kind of like, even without knowing about the fine-tuning of the universe and things like that we talked about here. So, Hitchens just kind of gave not quite the full story there. And this is kind of indicative of kind of the stuff he's doing. I says, he's given all the negative but hasn't given the positive. Like he's talking about half the hospitals in the United States were formed by churches or religious groups. Hitchens doesn't acknowledge that. One thing I just checked out is I'd heard that after independence,
after what?
After World War II, all the African countries that became independent, every single one of the heads of state were educated in mission schools. So I decided I'm going to check this out. I just found out just through a quick search of Wikipedia, which still took a few hours, that's not quite true, but a majority were. There's of the 34 countries I listed there, that about 18 or 19, sometimes you can't even tell because they just don't give that information in the biography. But see, that's one of the things that Hitchens does. He focuses on the negative, which you can't deny it's there, but totally ignores the positive too.
Well, that's not the point.
That's the point of the book. Religion poisons everything. The thing is, religion does not poison everything.
Tell us.
I had a question about the hospital thing.
Speak up.
I had a question about the hospital thing, about all the hospitals in the country and stuff like that. If we never had religions in the world, I suppose we would never have any hospitals.
We might have 2,400 less.
Well, no, we'd have the same ones. They'd just be based in different
Communist China
philosophies.
can
Thank
put
you.
Yeah. People get sick, people get hurt, people get, die.
Where did the idea of hospitals?
And also, I would like to say, in terms of hospitals and medicine, there is a time in history where the systematic study of the body and to study what illness is and where it comes from, it was just cloaked in superstition, and illness was demons, and also the body shouldn't be studied systematically, and medicine shouldn't be a thing because
but who are the ones who did that?
Because it is God's divine thing. And so what I'm saying is that there was a time when religion had a lot more power in the world, that it dictated we should not study the body because it is divinely inspired, it is a divine thing, and there's no systematic part of it that we can study and replicate and predict. And so then you have Descartes saying that the body is of the natural world, but the mind is not. But you have this natural progression from complete superstition to pushing back against the religious monopoly on truth and on free inquiry and on medicine. And so the only reason that we have hospitals is humanity pushed against the religious opposition to,
and remember
scientific inquiry.
In the book,
medicine.
he goes and talks about how the religion has prevented vaccines, both Muslim and. That's. It just slows up progress. Go ahead.
A couple of months ago, we read The Pale Blue Dot.
Right.
And Sagan argued that the more we see of the universe, the less we need a religion to explain all of it. And to him, I think, if I read him right, it's a natural progression of the more you know about your whole surrounding, and by that I mean clear out into the deep space cosmos. It seems so incredibly arrogant to me of man that he would think on this little pale blue dot in this little corner of the spiral nebula that God would give a what we do.
Right.
Or that
Well,
we
let
created it with
me
us in
address
mind.
the question on. I'm trying to figure out where this might be coming from. Now, in my study of religions, I do know that in traditional Chinese medicine, and which brings us acupuncture and some other things like that, there was a very big superstition about entering the human body, opening it up, and all kinds of theories were developed that the liver's iron and that the stomach is well, they never checked because it was against that religion of that day. But I'm trying to think when I could think of a well, Jehovah's Witnesses have been against organ transplants and vaccinations.
Well, that's much more modern. But
right,
I'm talking
right, but
about.
I'm trying to say, where did the Christians say we must not work on the body? I don't see this in Christianity.
It's in Rene Descartes' time of philosophy going into medicine and going into. Are there things we can know and predict about the natural world? Well, there was a time where people believed that because it's God created, nothing is replicated. If gravity, with gravity, it doesn't hold up as a natural law if an angel can come by and stop that apple from falling. And so if we live in a religious world, if the world is created by God and miracles are happening all the time, then the natural laws don't withstand. And so
we'll address that when we get to miracles, but it's important to understand that miracles can't happen all the time because then it would be natural. So if apples always stopped halfway down to earth, that would be the natural world that we would measure and know. So a miracle by very definition has to be extremely rare.
Yeah.
And so, and even in the biblical days, and we'll address this when we get to miracles, you have on the average a miracle. How often would a miracle happen? Once every how long?
If you were to take all the miracles in the Bible, approximately 250, and say that they just happened between Abraham and Jesus, you would have one miracle every 8 years.
But every 8 years?
Yeah, every 8 years.
When's the last day? When's the last time we had one here?
That's it.
They actually recorded one on tape, their ministry.
As far as the
yeah, they got it on audio tape.
As far as the Bible is concerned, it would be during your time of the apostles.
James, do you want to?
Well, and just to clarify,
that's a private miracle. We're not going
to clarify what I meant by that. I'm not saying that. So in that discussion about miracles, I think I will be on the Christian side that the nature of a miracle is defying the natural law, so it doesn't call into question the natural law. But what I'm saying is there was a time a long time ago when people were debating whether we should trust the world to be consistent. And so at a time when everyone believed that God intervened all the time, every time, that there wasn't a belief in philosophy that if you studied something, it would be the same the next time. And so there had to be a pushback against the religious communities to say, no, we should be allowed to study these things and study the body and study the brain and study the universe because we are going to go against the traditional view that it is religiously based and go with naturalism. And the only reason that we have come as far as we have with science is on the assumption of naturalism.
Yeah, well,
because if you take that away, then a lot of it falls.
There was historically a very strong resistance on the part of religious churches against the study of cadavers, for one thing. But you don't have to go back that far. Even today, in a lot of churches, there's a resistance to the idea that mental illness can be treatable through drugs or therapy or scientific methodologies. It's always seen, not always, but there's a segment, it's not as much now as it was maybe 20 years ago, that resisted any modern scientific approach to the study of mental illness. It was thought to be, a fault of the person, or maybe demonic possession of some sort. And you still find that in some circles, especially Pentecostal.
Let's talk about there have been couples in the media whose children have had an illness or have had an issue, and they decided to not treat the child, and the child has passed away. And we have prosecuted these parents for not doing for not taking care of and not taking the proper precautions. And so, what I think is interesting is we have a knowledge of medicine. We have the ability to investigate and to possibly help this person through non miracle means, and yet we're prosecuting these people for just hinging everything on their faith-based belief, when we're seeing that, as a trend, it's not the better bet. It's better to use.
What you're saying is a legitimate concern, and that there are children that die every year because of that. But this is on the extreme lunatic fringe of religion.
But how do you determine that?
I think how
do you not know?
He's the litmus test of what's
I'm
orthodox.
saying, how should you be considered wrong?
He would be on your side. He speaks out
one at a
against
time.
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
But we're talking about
Mormons.
Christian Science and some of the extreme
today, but if you go back
faith healers.
ago, I think the situation was much more widespread. I mean, you can't just say, okay.
I don't know the percentages of that, but I would say that was something that the mainstream Christianity looks at and say that's heretical. This is something we want to have no part of. Not just in what they believe about faith healing and medicine being evil, and that there is no such thing as sickness and disease. That's really part of the pantheistic worldview, not the monotheistic worldview. And so we would say
demonic possession. That's right now. The Catholic Church still has exorcisms.
Mm-hmm.
Still today.
That's a whole other issue.
They're not real Christians.
Let me do this. We're going to need to take our break right now. So let me have your attention real quickly. Okay, we're going to have a 10-minute break, and we're going to try to regroup. And what we're going to do is we're going to have some coffee available, some other refreshments. There's still some dessert left in there. Take a little restroom break, and so we'll be back in 10 minutes. Well, welcome back to part 2 of the March edition of the Atheist and Christian Book Club. We are a monthly get-together of both skeptics and true-believing Christians, respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. I do want to remind you that part of the tag there is respectfully, and we do want to make sure that we are kind and gracious in our remarks, whichever side that we're on. Realize that we're all here together, even though we're on opposite sides of a very important issue. I guarantee you, I've learned these 3 years that we have more in common than we have that separates us. And so one of the things I really enjoy about this is real friendships develop out of that. I used to say we want to try to be friendly. Well, we're way beyond that. We are friends. Some of you are, I would call, close friends at this point. And so this is something I think very good that comes out of the book club. I want Ron to kind of bring us back on track. I've got some more quotes that we have of some actual pages of the book. We do want to try to keep this a little bit more on topic, that we're talking about this book that we're dealing with. And so sometimes we have our favorite kind of talking points that we like to go off that may or may not be part of the book. So not that there's never a time for that, but there's so much stuff in the book that we really want to get to, so let's try to focus on that. So Ron, what was your take from a Christian perspective? What was your take on the book?
Hopefully you all will follow me and this won't take us off track. Taking the whole broad sweep of the book, which I really enjoyed. I mean, how can you not enjoy the language, the way he writes? And I listened to it, which made it that much better. But taking from cover to cover, what I get out of it is a lot of complaints about the behavior of religious people. Is that fair?
Yes.
So, here's my point. It's incredibly well researched. His knowledge of philosophers and history and religious figures and movements and such. The details, the research he apparently has done, or the knowledge he had in his head to write all this, I think is amazing. But the bonus that came to me, it was a complete surprise. I had to digest this a little bit as I was reading or listening to the book, is that he has proven what the prophet Jeremiah said 3,000 years ago, that people's hearts are desperately wicked and do all kinds of horrible things to other people.
Preach it, Ron.
Well, okay, so Ron, what you're saying that when he says that religion poisons everything, he's talking about religious people, the people. So instead of defending that to say we're not as bad as you say we are, maybe we should say actually we're worse because of
some ways
we are total depravity, all of us, whether we're atheists. And this is a Christian worldview. Whether you're an atheist or a Christian, or whether you're a Buddhist, or whether you're an agnostic, all of us. The Christian position is all of us are sinners, and we are.
I don't like that word myself.
Well, the fact we don't like it, so maybe if you believe in total depravity, that maybe this is what part of what Christopher Hitchens is pointing out is that depravity.
Well, let's just say that people.
He's proven that many people, from the most primitive, superstitious things that you might call primitive religions, to modern religions, the great world religions, have done all kinds of evil things, and oftentimes they do it in the name of their religion.
Right.
But then he stretched a little farther, and he even tried to cast that net over Hitler and Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot. And to me, which is a real stretch.
I agree with your premise. I don't know that it takes divine revelation to let us know that we have propensity to do
we got
bad
a problem.
things.
Humans have a problem.
Does it take prophet Jeremiah?
Well, no.
But
I think what he's saying is
Jeremiah nailed it 3,000 years ago.
the very fact that Christopher Hitchens made the point proves it doesn't require divine revelation. I mean, it was Hitchens who said it. So what I'm saying is, I think what we're saying is that maybe we should be agreeing with more of what he says from our worldview than what our initial, reaction is. Oh, well, no, we're not that bad. Maybe we're worse.
I think it's the opposite.
Okay, what would you say? We're actually good people?
I think it's the opposite because there is this narrative from religions, especially Christianity, that human beings are broken and sinners, and the point he makes in the book is that it creates a sickness and then commands you on pain of death to be well, and it's a very unfair thing to ask of people. So it's like a lot of religious faiths will say, oh, did you know that you're broken? Did you know I have the cure, and give me money? And so it's kind of like this thing. So the other part of that is
that's healthcare in our country.
Yeah. Well, and so I do think that he also mentions, I'm not sure if he mentions it in this book, but he has quoted this, that bad people are going to do bad things, good people are going to do good things. But
define good people.
Meaning people who have malintent are going to do bad things. People who have good intent are going to do good things. But for good people to do bad things, it takes religion. And so he makes So what that means is that the reason that I would put Stalin and Hitler in with, or Stalin and Nazism in with religiosity is because it is a worldview that is dogmatic, that creates behaviors that wouldn't have existed without that philosophy. And so if you look at the
it's
potential,
not just religion, it's philosophy.
It's dogma. So dogmatic views within religious or within
is that
political.
a dogmatic view?
Well, Nazism is a dogmatic view.
But is your view also dogmatic right now?
How would it be dogmatic?
How would it not?
I hate to counter you.
Well, meaning that if you have a dogmatic view that is unchanging, that is resistant to the outside world, Nazism was that, eugenics was that, and Stalinism was that. So those are included in dogma, which is the poison of religion that I think he's referring to.
I think what Jesus is getting at is
the only ones who are not dogmatic.
That's what he's getting at. Is he's saying that? How do you know you're
religious
not?
people are not dogmatic too? Sometimes it's just that the dogma itself, people either go with it or against it, and that is where you get true freedom.
But are you truly an open-minded, reasonable, undogmatic person, Courtney?
I don't think I could ever answer that because I might believe that I am, but I do think everybody is flawed. We can try to be. But meaning that the only reason that we got things like the Holocaust is because you had a view within Nazism that was based on a lot of really horrible premises, and you had a dogmatic belief that people were taken into, which caused good people to do things that they thought were good within their worldview. And that is what has the potential to be deadly. And so that is good people doing horrible, horrible things
If they
because
can do
they
horrible
believe.
things, are they good people?
Were
they ever good people?
I think they
if
are
were
good
capable
people.
of doing those horrible things?
I think everyone's capable of doing horrible things.
No, the Nazi guards, the Nazi youth.
Can I clarify that? I think that every single human being is capable
Yes.
of good things or bad things.
Yes.
I think that,
Yeah,
whether
totally.
they're religious or not. But I
So
do think
we
I
can't
do think
divide
that
them into good people and bad
no. I think everyone's capable of that. But I think that
The influence.
for a huge amount of people within the German population to perpetuate something like the Holocaust, they are not individually evil. They are guided by a dogmatic philosophy that did not stand the test of time, but did motivate people to do bad things that they thought were good at the time for their own motivation, for a higher morality above what they thought in their view was
And
normally.
the German leadership
Does that make
was-
sense?
Yes.
It's really complicated. But all I'm saying is that I think that's a lot more complicated than what it's being stated here.
So are you saying that Nazism was like a religion or was a religion?
It was like it was a dogmatic what was that
Ideology?
word? Ideology.
Yeah.
It was a dogmatic ideology that made people who might have some of them were good, some of them weren't good, but people came together on a large enough scale to where you can't write them off as just simply evil people. They were motivated by a dogmatic worldview, a dogmatic ideology. And so what I'm saying is that within Christianity, you have people who are completely benign, completely, they live lives that are completely meaningful, and they gain meaning from Christianity. My dad is one among them.
We would call them good people.
They're people.
But they're capable of doing horrible things.
Everyone is.
Could I raise a specific point in the book?
Yeah.
So I was listening from the perspective, I listened to the audiobook, from the perspective of my former self as an evangelical. He took a pretty broad brush to religion. He attacked Muslims, and I was never a Catholic, so whatever he said about Catholics, that was fair game. But if I'd been evangelical, I mean, there weren't that many things particularly about the evangelicals that he slammed, but there were a few pointed ones that I wanted to raise, and this gets back to the idea of good people with good intentions fostering bad things. And I think of the question of Israel. That there's a belief among many conservative evangelicals, especially in America, that Israel even today is counted as God's chosen people, and therefore there's an instinctual siding with Israel, regardless of what the Israeli state does or doesn't do that's good or bad. It's always Israel that they side with. Never mind that in the conflicts historically between the Israelis and the Arabs, that there's a 5-to-1 ratio between the loss of life of the Arabs versus the Israelis. In other words, 5 times more Arabs have died in all these conflicts than the Israelis. But it's the mere idea that, okay, they read in this text in Genesis 15, this is God's chosen people. Therefore, that gets imputed upon indiscriminately upon the Israeli state, regardless of how they're acting, regardless of how they're treating the people, the indigenous people of the land. That is screwed up. That's an example.
Would you say that's not Christian?
But it's close to home because most evangelicals instinctually side with Israel. I think it's causing harm. So I think that the church needs to reevaluate the position.
Oh, there's a love affair between evangelicals. I mean, just go down to San Antonio.
It's a blind love affair.
Oh my God!
Well,
We're a little off track though.
And I'm sorry, I keep talking. But okay, so real quick, the point that he makes in the Israeli conflict is that you have two religious groups that are religiously motivated to believe that space is theirs by God, and that conflict will never end because of the religious belief that guides them to claim that as theirs and not waver on it, not 1 inch. And so the issue that he's saying is that these people on both sides, it's not because it's bad people doing bad things in the name of religion. It is people doing bad things to each other because of their religious belief, not in the name of, because it's there. They would not be fighting. They would equal it out if they believed that land was what they wanted, but they would half it and be fine if there wasn't a religious belief that is theirs all whole.
It's
and
a
that's,
dogma.
that's the difference.
Yeah, with sacred, there is no compromise. If
Yes.
something is sacred, by definition, there can be no compromise.
Yes,
But
and he makes that
If
point
you have a
that-
secular worldview, then you can compromise.
Right, and so I think that's an example of where he's saying that religion poisons everything. Religion is the poison that causes them to fight so hard for that space to be only theirs. Without the belief, you don't have the conflict.
Secular patriotism for one's own country, regardless of what you believe about God, is also just as equally a problem for fighting. It's not just like Arabs and Israelis fighting over land because of God. There's a lot of secular politics that drives the conflict as well. So it's not so much.
But what we call
it's
that
not
is
so much,
dogmatic.
yeah, but whatever it is, it's not just. I think this is the problem that I had with Hitchens' book, is that he paints this as an exclusively religious problem.
No, I don't think he
Well,
does.
I think
Well, he's focused on
religion poisons everything.
It's-
So it's ultimately. I mean, whether he's saying it implicitly.
It doesn't
or
say it's
explicitly.
the only poison.
No, but the idea that you get the idea by the end of the book that these are exclusive problems to religion, and this is why religion poisons everything.
Right.
I'm not saying that he's saying that explicitly, but by the end of this, that's the flavor you get, that the conflicts that you describe are only religious. If you don't have religion, then you can, the United States and Canada can exist peacefully because we're not religiously fighting over North America.
Right. There isn't a religious text saying Canada is ours.
It's sacred.
But
right?
there are things that are
manifest destiny.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
That there are things that are in conflict politically, socially, socioeconomically that drive conflict of countries that are not religiously related at all.
Just ask the Indians. No, and I think he makes that point
Pol Pot?
too.
How do you explain the totally atheist, secular, war going on as well? How do you explain?
Well, that's making his point.
Yeah.
See, my point is that man is very capable of doing all kinds of horrible things to other people. We're capable of doing horrible things to other people, and there are three primary motives: sex, power, and money.
Mm-hmm.
And that explains behavior,
I think
whether
I would add
people
dogma in
affiliate
there.
with religion or not.
I think I would add dogma.
Maybe that comes under the power.
Well, where does
Power.
confirmation bias stop and dogma begins?
Well, confirmation. Well, I don't. That's two separate things. But dogma, meaning that people who aren't motivated by either of those three things can be motivated only by dogma. You have suicide bombers who are only motivated by their religious belief that this is the moral thing to do, and that's the argument that Sam Harris makes, is that if you take the religion out of it, these people would either be, moral people or non-moral people. But
how many of us saw that?
The reason that they're there is that
Christopher Hitchens seemed pretty dogmatic. How many would agree with that?
The idea seems to be that
he
Hitchens is appealing to.
There was no give with him.
No,
But there's a reason there was no
Christopher
good.
Hitchens.
Oh.
He was battling this battle for his whole life, and he was attacked his whole life.
His dogma is justified.
Well, what dogma are you talking
it's not
about?
dogma. It's a conflict
being
that he's
anti-religious.
responding to.
No, that's not
Well,
a
I
dogma.
think the problem is he's appealing to it's the fallacy of consequences. He's look at all the bad consequences of religion, therefore it must probably be false.
Right.
That's a fallacious appeal to consequences.
And I think he concedes that in the book.
I don't think so.
He says that, like, just because I think there is a quote in there that I remember that if everything were bad, if religion only acted badly, that wouldn't make it untrue.
I got a quote from him on that. He says on
But
page.
he's just saying that's
Page
separate from whether it's
185.
true.
By the same token, I do not say that if I catch a Buddhist priest stealing all the offerings left by the simple folk at his temple, Buddhism is thereby discredited.
Right.
But that's one sentence. The whole thrust of the rest of his book denies his approach right there.
But that it's
It
creating.
does.
I think
it's
he
not
argues
together.
that religion is not true. He uses the argument from design. He attacks those on their own merits. But then he also adds to it, not only is it not true, but it's
But
bad.
this is why we should be
So
glad
it's not
true.
It's not because it's bad. It's not true. It's it's not true, and it's.
Does he ever argue for its truth, or is there's just attacking individual acts of people?
But again,
No,
you're straw manning it. You're saying that his only argument is the poison. You're saying you both keep saying I love you, but that you keep saying that the truth, that what he's saying is that the reason that it's poisonous is because individuals acting badly. I keep making the point, and he makes the point in the book that is completely far from his point. He's saying that because of the dogmatism is the evil. It's not individuals doing bad things. It's
He's saying
the whole system.
because of the individuals doing bad things, then we can say that religion is evil because
No.
of
No, Courtney, I get your point. I get your point.
Does that
I
make
agree
sense?
with you, but I think it's a very, very relatively small segment of Christians who have been poisoned, whose behavior has been poisoned
Yes.
because of their Christianity.
I agree
In
with
fact,
you.
from my perspective, you look at what the world must have been like 2,000 years ago. The greatest revolution in the history of this planet is what Christianity is, the way Christianity has influenced the world over 2,000 years.
Right.
Let's do this. I want to go to this. May be one of Hitchens' most famous quotes. I've heard it quite a bit. It makes a great meme. This is from page 150. It's Daniel. Can you read that for us?
What can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. This is even more true when evidence eventually offered is so shoddy and self-interested. And the reason I decided to pick this quote is because, number one, it echoes Carl Sagan from A Candle in the Dark, where he uses the chapter on the dragon in my garage, the invisible dragon in my garage, where we get the famous quote, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. There's a back and forth debate that we get involved with what counts as evidence. And so the Sagan's claim or the Hitchens claim is predicated upon the idea of this idea of evidence. What's the ultimate standard for the evidence of God or religion or Christianity? What counts as evidence? Who's the arbitrator of evidence? How do we know the evidence is shoddy and self-interested? What's an objective standard by which we can tell whether or not there is evidence for God's existence? So there's a whole can of worms in that statement about what counts as evidence. So I thought that would be a good place to discuss things.
Well, but it's kind of out of the context of that chapter, though, because I think that's kind of at the end of making that
Well,
point.
I can read the
isn't
whole
it?
context.
That's okay.
Well, but does that make sense? Like, he's probably saying that as a conclusion to laying out some reasons that he's
the
saying
chapter's
that.
on the miracles. It's our focus chapter on chapter 10. It's
Right.
talking about the tawdriness of the miraculous, and so he's making qualitative assumptions about the evidence.
Well,
So
no,
that's-
he's laying out in that chapter why he's calling that shoddy evidence.
Let's go over this first of all. I think we have a question or statement.
Okay. I did not read the book. I came because my grandson, who is 22 years old, claims he's an atheist one day and a Catholic the next day. And it seems to me like this whole conversation has been dominated by certain people, and nobody else has said nothing. Nobody is allowed to speak anything. And you guys are very young. You have not experienced life. Maybe you are in my age category. I don't know.
You're the winner.
I don't know, but
When
you
I get
have
old,
a
I'll
loud
let you know.
voice. And I respect you for it, and I respect you because I think you own this house, right?
Yeah, he's kind of like,
Yeah, it's
But I think like this, I have talked with many, many people. And I've been to several other churches besides what I was raised in. And I think the whole idea is that we are all brothers and sisters. If your brother falls, pick him up, give him something to eat. Express love and kindness. And let's forget about all this baloney that is crap to me.
well, here's one point that bugs me is I go to this church. It used to be First Euless Baptist. It's now some consultants came in and said, you guys are not hip enough. You need to change it to Cross City. So they spent all that money doing that. Now they're going to spend $8 million just so we can have coffee bars and be cool like the Gateway churches and the Watermark churches and all the hip churches. That's what really bugs me is all that money could go to missions.
Can I ask you a question?
You want it to go to missions?
Yeah, rather than just wasting money.
Right. I'm with you there. Look, are you familiar with Larry and Tiz
No. No, I've heard him. What about him?
Listen to him sometime. That guy was the biggest drug dealer in the world. And he went to church looking for people he could sell his drugs to. He had a plantation in Colombia, and he used to beat his wife up. Now she has come down with cancer.
Well, that's one of the reasons I became a Christian, was the testimonies were so
You are a
powerful.
Christian?
And
I didn't catch your name. I'm sorry. What's your
It doesn't matter.
Okay, it doesn't matter.
She
But
said
I
you
do
are
hope.
a
Thank
fan.
you
Oh, no,
for
no,
being
I
here.
was
Right.
a
Thank you
What
for
I
being
have
here.
been through and what I have experienced
And thank
in my
you
life.
for sharing that with us. I do hope that you and your son can feel welcome to come back here.
Well,
for the next
when I
meeting.
wrote him a letter, I mean, it was by accident that I'm here. It wasn't on purpose. I need cataract surgery, so I can't drive to my church at night, so I ended up walking to my pastor's church. So this was not in my plan. But just because he says all this stuff, and this is the kid, all my grandchildren have been in church, but he's pushing me around, telling me to shut up and using 4-letter words on me, and I'm like, what did I do so wrong? Why are they? And I just think, like, you know, that isn't evil, because he works in a pot shop. He fights constantly with his girlfriend. And like his friends say, one day he's a Catholic, one day he's an atheist. He doesn't know where he knows where he's from.
But my objection is, it's just such a waste of resources, because what happens is you'll get a youth minister who goes, how come he gets all the glory, and you know, these pastors have huge egos. And then they go, when they have a disagreement, so they pull the members out and they start their own church. I mean, there's like blocks within each other. You have churches. What a waste of time.
I don't remember what
So
chapter that was.
You're saying something about human nature? Then?
Yeah.
Something about human nature.
So,
is that unique to pastors?
And not only that, but the Muslims, to get just a practical thing. Forget about the running airplanes into buildings. To go and have to waste time praying 5 times a day, getting up at the crack of dawn, it just adds stress to people's lives, religion does.
So who are they praying to?
A false god. If you believe in Christianity, it's a false god.
Let me tell you something.
Wait a minute. I gotta ask you.
Satan.
Now, Bill, aren't all God's faults? Let me just qualify this.
It's Satan.
You're an atheist, right? So aren't all God's faults?
Sure, but some are more false than others. Believe me, I go to church. I've been in this deal my whole life. You can go to one of these hip evangelical churches, Watermark, Great Gateway, right, and you can do all your little sins you want.
Why do you have to go to a big church? Why don't you go to a church where you know who sits?
Because then they know about your sin. They know your sin.
Let's do this. I don't know at what point I lost control.
It doesn't matter.
But let's do this. I'm going to ask. We have Jim Hall here, who's the one of the hosts of Atheist Edge, and Courtney is too. And I'm going to ask Jim, can you rescue atheism from where Bill has taken it?
Unfortunately, there's no live chat questions, so I'm just going to fill this time with some blabbering. I'll try to be real quick. 3 things. Some are going to be on that same tangent of that Big Bang one. I'm a cradle atheist. I have never believed. I've never prayed once in my life. But by the time I got to this book changed me in some way. It introduced me to the concept. I'm just going to talk about this one. It introduced me to the concept of a firebrand. I didn't know what a firebrand was. I didn't know that you could be this.
Look in the mirror, Jim.
This book is
motivation.
Is hugely responsible for when you two met me 3 years ago. This book was a huge influence. I was a firebrand back then. Now that I'm not saying this is a bad. I'm not discounting Hitchens, but that's one way of going through life. I just don't think it fosters communication. So since then, I've settled into what I am now, which you will agree is not firebrand at all. In fact,
oh my God, Jim! I saw your interview with Brady.
I'm growing on you.
Remember his interview with Brady?
You're a big influence on leveling me out, doing the show. And it does not, being like
Jim,
Hitchens.
One quick thing. Leveling out, you let Brady walk all over you in that interview.
No, he did. In that same interview, Brady conceded that the word faith used 19 times in the Bible should be removed and replaced with trust.
Okay, go ahead.
So I think there was concessions on both sides.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
Brady, am I wrong?
No, we agreed on
We agreed on it.
Because you gave up so much ground, you just let him walk all over you.
Yeah. Anyway.
One at a time.
Is Jim
Okay,
a-
Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
Is he a good person?
Yeah. Wait, he's going from the firebrand to this.
Just asking.
To this.
We
milk
always fall
toast
into a morality
atheist.
discussion. Let's avoid that. You know what I'm saying?
That's what he is. He's a milk toast.
I'll skip the big
atheist.
bit, Courtney. We'll skip.
Well, just because that got us onto a big tangent.
These religious hospitals, we were talking earlier, how ubiquitous they are. And would they be replaced with the secular hospitals, or would there just be less hospitals? Now, that aside, I of course think the hospitals would meet the need of the people. So it would fill the gap. It should, but hats off to the believers that reach out there and the people that donate money and the people, there's something good to be said for that. But when, in the times of crisis, like right now with the virus going around, this is the first time in the 3 years of this current administration where I'm seeing the administration look to the experts and start actually believing what they're saying. It's
still
like
not doing that.
when push comes to shove, when the back's up against the wall, the prayer, the faith, everything kind of takes a back seat to let's actually start listening to these experts for a change. That's what I'm seeing too. All right, that's all
Can
I'll
I
say.
say something to all of y'all? Do you not know that just like cancer, it makes a lot of people rich? Not to
What do you mean,
find a
religion?
cure.
No, the
Cancer.
virus.
No, not to find a cure,
Cancer.
she said.
Cancer. And
That's kind of
the
another topic.
thought of, to me, the thought of y'all giving this dude so much respect.
Who's that? Christopher Hitchens?
The guy that wrote the book on
Oh yeah.
atheism.
No, he's going to be looked back upon as the Mark Twain of the 20th century.
And you do not need
please.
a microphone.
No doubt.
Ever.
Jesus Christ.
I would hate to be
One
your
of the
kid.
smartest guys that ever lived. Are you kidding
Well,
me?
and can I just say to your criticism, I do think that
I like Mark.
I'm not criticizing.
well,
I have been listening to everything
yeah.
I can, and what I've learned from the tiniest person, and I'll call him Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson has taught me a lot about religion. Like, religion is just a hoax. The preachers are making lots of money, and guess who's paying for their money, for their homes and
well,
their cars?
I just wanted to kind of say that this discussion is in no way a heated debate. It is a discussion out of respect and love for each other and a love of the topic and an interest
I know,
in the
but y'all
topic.
had the floor.
And so yes, but I'm just saying that the.
Well, wait till
that-
Frank
that-
Turek comes here. It's going to be completely different.
It sounded to me like saying that we were arguing, and I don't think that's.
Go ahead, Jim. What were you saying?
One last thing.
I know.
Maybe something will bring us all together, and I know it will. Shortly after Hitchenson's death, you know what he died of? Esophagus cancer.
Yeah,
There was a
cigarette
lot of talk on the evangelical, on the Christian side, saying
He gave in.
no, it's not by chance that's what he died of, because your throat, that's what he used as his weapon of Satan, right? And so that's what got attacked. God attacked his throat, and we can all
he was a
agree that
cigarette
that's
smoker.
just
Nonsense.
That's ridiculous.
Okay,
but
thank
no,
you.
Jim, I've been in apologetics for like 6 years, and I have never heard that before.
I have.
Oh, that was
no, I
huge.
believe
Yeah,
that.
I have. I can
and
show
I
you
can see that there are some
people
zealots.
laughing.
There are some zealots
People
who would do
laughing
something
about
that
it.
ignorant.
No, they weren't
All right.
zealots.
Here's another one.
Well,
My dad died with that, and you know what? For once in his life, he had to shut up.
Jim, were you
And he
going
had to listen to us.
to finish up the point on that? You had about.
If you are celebrating a malady like that, even whether or not you attribute it to some divine cause, we can all agree that's just
ignorant. That's
that's
just
low.
ignorant.
That's low.
And it's
Okay,
a direct disobedience of Scripture, by the way, too.
Okay.
I think that's the whole flavor of what I would call religion. I was raised in a Protestant church, and I didn't know Christ until I was 16. I started when I was going 5, Sunday school, fellowship churches. I lit the candles and the whole 9 yards as a child growing up in church. I did not know Jesus. It wasn't discussed a whole lot. It was just you go and sing the same old hymns and do the same old ritual every Sunday. And I was faithful in all the church suppers and everything. And I went to, well, you know the name Billy Graham. I don't know what you think of him, but aside from that, I thought he was a good preacher. I didn't know anything about him. My mother and my grandmother asked me to come with them to see him. I said, well, what's the big deal? Well,
Hallelujah.
And what I was drawn to was his southern accent, because I'm from Boston. I really appreciated his southern accent. That's interesting language. But he pointed out, and you know, you don't need me to say this, but John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. And at that point, I did not need proof that I had done wrong and there was something wrong with me. I wasn't thinking about heaven. At 16, every 16-year-old thinks they're going to live forever. So that wasn't of interest. What was interesting to me was peace and forgiveness for what I knew I had done wrong. And so I went up and I asked Christ to come into my heart. And at that point, Jeremiah 17:9, Jeremiah says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? But Jesus gave me a new heart. That's the difference. Old Testament, New Testament, that's why I'm here. That to me is, I mean, Christopher Hitchens lit me up. He's amazing. But there's a lot of things that I see that he was hurt and you know, scarred, and for that,
let me say this about Hitchens too. One of the things in my research and all, he comes across as really, really. I mean, if you're a Christian, very eloquent, but also very arrogant at the same time. He can come across that way. Okay, I still could listen to him for hours. Just the way he says it is a beauty in itself. So you might not like what he's saying, but you love how he's saying it. And so, so in that way, I enjoyed the book. But I found he had debated, had a debate with John, who's a guy from
Lennox.
John Lennox. He did a debate with him, and he had a follow-up debate. And in the very beginning of it, he just came across as a Christopher Hitchens I had not seen. He was very, at the beginning, they asked him, why is he coming to Birmingham, Alabama, all the way from England to have this second debate with John Lennox? And he said, well, I made a mistake in my first debate with Dr. Lennox. I made the mistake of polling the audience before how many agreed with me and how many afterwards. And I must admit, I lost the debate. And so I'm here hoping for revenge. So, I mean, here's somebody that, I mean, I don't know if I lost the debate, if I would acknowledge that. You know, you always want to think you won the debate. But he not only acknowledged, he was very humble about it. And there was more to it than that, but that just, I won't bore you with the details.
He also misunderstood. He thought he'd been invited to Birmingham, England.
So anyway, I've got another quote that I want to look at, and I'm going to ask Daniel if he'll read this for us. This is from page 151 of God Is Not Great.
We did that already.
Oh, we did. I'm sorry. Let's do this one. 153.
This is the end of our second reading chapter, the end of chapter 10. He says, there are days when I miss my old convictions as if they were an amputated limb. But in general, I feel better and no less radical, and you will feel better too, I guarantee, once you leave the hold of the doctrinaire and allow your chainless mind to do its own thinking. And what struck me about this quote, and I thought would be interesting for discussion, would be that I imagine, what if a Christian told the atheists, this is what will happen, this is the conviction, this is why you should become Christians, you will feel better. In reverse, nobody would let us pass with that one. But here Christopher is entering the chapter about religion with merely saying that you will feel better. And I thought that struck me as almost beneath his level of intellect and argument and logic, that you're just kind of going with feelings there. I don't know if anybody has any.
That was the sum of his argument.
No, I'm not saying the subject, but that he would even inject this idea that.
Well, don't Christians say that your life will be filled with joy if you follow Jesus? I mean,
yes, that they do.
Yeah,
come on.
But the point is that if he's. It just struck me as interesting.
Here's how I would try to put the best spin on that for
because there's more to
it's an appeal to emotion. You're right.
That maybe he feels like that Christians are appealing to emotion anyway.
Which I know people do.
And if all my reason hasn't persuaded you, let me just say that if you're searching for the emotion, you'll get that too. So
Yes.
maybe he wasn't trying to make a direct
My
appeal
experience was,
to
when I
just
left the faith,
emotion.
it was tumultuous. I mean, it was terrible.
That's what
I'm going to tell
we
you,
can
don't
fix
do
that.
it. Don't do it if you want to live a very, pain-free life. Yeah.
I think that's a good.
Not in the South.
That's why I challenge what you're saying. I think sometimes we assume that doctrine and authority is a bad thing, but the reality is doctrine actually frees you from a lot of the stress and the whipsaw of different things. And today I'm this, and tomorrow I should be that, or I have to listen to this man, or I don't. I mean, we all know that parental authority is a good thing, right? Parents do the things and take charge of situations so the children can grow up, right?
Not
So by the same thing, by the same token, a doctrine that gives you boundaries is actually something that frees you from the quagmires that are out there. So I don't know that dogma is necessarily a bad thing at all.
Yeah, I think what Daniel was saying, though, that again, it's you don't want to. Neither side wants to argue that you want to go this way because it makes you feel good. If I told you you won the lottery, you'd feel good if you believe me, but it's not true. So you want to go with truth. I would prefer a bitter truth to a sweet lie every day.
It just seemed like
that's what we need
it
to
just
make a
seemed like
commitment
to me that it was another example of an appeal to consequence as a. I'm not saying that was his whole argument, but it just seemed like the whole idea of the feelings making it. He's not saying that it makes it true, but it seems like it does appeal to the persuasion of his argument was you feel better.
Doesn't he say several times that he never believed? What doctrinaire was he letting go of?
Trotskyite Marxism.
Oh, now I get it. Okay, thank you.
That's horrible.
And let me say, this is a whole other part. It was not in the book, but a whole other part of the Christopher Hitchens story was how he radically changed his political position after 9/11, which cost him dear friends, and basically he paid a steep price for being willing to shift his position on something. So if he found something to be true, I think he would embrace what he felt to be true regardless of the cost. And that's I admire about Christopher Hitchens.
Did you see the TED Talks when he had a debate about was the Muslim faith a religion of terror?
Yeah.
No.
It was quite a debate.
It was.
How many people saw that?
Did he do a TED Talk?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yes. Look it up.
So exciting.
It's fantastic.
I'm sorry, I know I'm not supposed to
I'm
speak
sorry.
anymore.
I didn't mean to take you. I do know a little about Christopher Hitchens.
I'm doing my best.
That's good to know.
There was a podcast, I can't remember who it was. It wasn't maybe Jonathan Morrow or somebody like that. They actually made a road trip with him. They had to drive like 3 or 4 hours together. He said
That was Larry Taunton.
Okay, he said he was a completely different person in the car. He was delightful. He was open-minded, and they had.
It wasn't just Larry. A number of his debate foes or something has said that has said something along the lines of that he has never said anything to me harsh or negative unless we're on stage. But once he's off stage. In fact, one I can't remember which of the Christian apologists said that they were having coffee downstairs in the lobby before the meeting, and several atheist fans of Christopher Hitchens recognized him, came over, and knew that these were Christians, and started to be sharp with them and do some ridicule or something like that. And Hitchens put him. He Hitch slapped him. Put him in his place and said, these are my friends, and you're going to respect my friends if you're going to be with me.
Now, on the other hand, his brother might speak differently about it.
Yes. We tried to contact Peter Hitchens, because we obviously can't bring the author in, Christopher Hitchens, but could we by video bring in Peter Hitchens? We weren't able to get any response back from him on that. But
expound a bit on him.
I did listen to that podcast after your recommendation, and I'm thinking maybe it was a good thing that we did not hear back from Peter Hitchens. He is in some way the exact opposite of his brother, but he is eloquent and has the vocabulary that his brother does. So that might be a way of saying
They
it.
never
And
liked
he
each
came
other at
across
all.
the same when I was
Really?
researching him, Peter Hitchens. He's Christian, exact opposite of his brother, but he has a saying that is probably common. I had not heard it before. It's just at some point when you're arguing with people who don't know how to argue, it's best to give up because it's like playing chess with squirrels. So I love that, and I found a meme and put it together, playing chess with squirrels.
Or a pigeon where they're just gonna like knock all of the pieces off and
poop all over
and
the
poop all
set.
over the board and say that they won.
Yeah. Although you always win, they never know that you did.
Yeah.
It's like that scene from the Cuckoo's Nest where they're playing a Monopoly, and one of the guys keeps eating it. Hotel, and he's spitting them.
Well, let's just remind, we're going to close up for the meeting. Let me say thank you, especially all the new people who were here. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you enjoyed it, and you will be back for more. Remember, our next club, the April club, is actually going to be the last Friday of March. So put that on your calendar, and then after that, the following meeting is going to be Tim McGrew, and we're going to be talking about the 4 views, Christianity and philosophy. Thanks so much for being part of the club. I'm James Walker, co-founder of the Atheist Christian Book Club, along with my friend Bill Cluck, the other co-founder, saying thanks so much for being here.
You have it on your channel.